Entitled Woman Wrongly Sues a Neighbor. She leaked photos that shocked everyone. The letter that would change everything arrived on a Tuesday morning, wedged between a pizza flyer and an overdue electric bill. Mia Carter almost missed it as she juggled her morning routine, getting her 10-year-old son Tommy ready for school, trying to save her withering tomato plants, and preparing for another day at the local diner where she waited tables. But something about the crisp, official-looking envelope made her stomach clench. "Mom, I can't find my science project," Tommy called from upstairs, his voice tinged with panic. "Check under your bed, sweetie," Mia replied automatically, her trembling fingers already tearing open the envelope. As her eyes scanned the legal document inside, the world seemed to tilt sideways. Words jumped out at her like accusations. "Notice of lawsuit, property violation, immediate removal required." The greenhouse. They were coming after her greenhouse. Mia's legs went weak, and she sank into one of her mismatched kitchen chairs. The small structure in her backyard wasn't just a hobby. It was Tommy's science fair project, their future vegetable garden, and most importantly, their chance at cutting down the ever-increasing grocery bills. She'd spent months researching how to build it using recycled materials and YouTube tutorials, working late into the night after Tommy went to bed. A sharp knock at the front door made her jump. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer sunglasses. Veronica Sterling, the HOA president herself, stood on her doorstep like a shark circling its prey. "Coming!" Mia called out, quickly wiping her eyes and straightening her waitress uniform. She opened the door, plastering on her best customer service smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter." Veronica's voice dripped with artificial sweetness. She lowered her sunglasses, revealing cold blue eyes that reminded Mia of winter frost. "I trust you've received our notice?" "I literally just opened it," Mia replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I don't understand. The greenhouse meets all the height requirements, and I used approved materials." "Oh, darling," Veronica cut her off with a patronizing laugh. "It's not about the specifications. It's about proper channels. You failed to submit Form 27B for auxiliary structures, didn't present your plans to the Architectural Review Board, and violated Section 12, Paragraph 3 of our community guidelines regarding aesthetic uniformity." Behind Veronica, Mia could see her own reflection in the window, dark circles under her eyes from working double shifts, hair hastily pulled back, yesterday's mascara slightly smudged. She looked exactly like what she was, a tired single mother trying her best to make ends meet. The contrast between them couldn't have been starker. "I'll file the paperwork today," Mia offered desperately. "I can pay the review fee." "That window has closed," Veronica interrupted, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "The board has already voted. You have 48 hours to remove the structure, or we'll begin assessing daily fines, starting at $500 per day." The amount hit Mia like a physical blow. That was more than she made in a week at the diner. "That's impossible. You can't." "Mom?" Tommy appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching his science project, a detailed model of a sustainable ecosystem, with the greenhouse as its centerpiece. "What's going on?" Veronica's eyes flickered to Tommy, and for a moment, something like guilt crossed her face. But it vanished so quickly, Mia thought she might have imagined it. 48 hours, Mrs. Carter. I suggest you start dismantling that eyesore today." As Veronica clicked away in her expensive heels, Mia noticed something odd. Through the woman's gauzy white blouse, she could see what looked like dirt stains on the back, fresh ones, as if she'd been doing yard work. But in the 3 years Mia had lived in the neighborhood, she'd never once seen Veronica Sterling lift a finger in her own immaculate yard. That was what her army of landscapers was for. "Mom?" Tommy's voice brought her back to reality. He was looking at her with those big brown eyes that could break her heart. "Are they going to make us take down the greenhouse? But what about my project? What about our vegetables?" Mia pulled her son close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "Don't worry, baby. I'll figure something out." But even as she said the words, she felt hollow inside. Her eyes drifted to Veronica's house across the street, where an elaborate gazebo stood in stark contrast to Mia's modest greenhouse. The structure had appeared practically overnight last summer, without any board meetings or community votes that Mia could recall. That evening, after Tommy was asleep, Mia sat at her kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and a growing stack of papers. Her lawyer friend, Sarah, had warned her over the phone. Fighting the HOA would be expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of success. But as Mia reviewed her bank statements and bills, a strange detail caught her eye. The HOA dues had increased 3 times in the past year, each time with a vague explanation about community improvements that she'd never seen materialize. Through her kitchen window, she could see Veronica's gazebo illuminated by soft landscaped lighting. As she watched, a shadow moved behind the ornate structure, too tall to be Veronica, too broad to be her absent husband. The figure disappeared quickly, but it left Mia with an uneasy feeling in her stomach. She pulled out her phone and opened the community Facebook group, scrolling through months of complaints and warnings from Veronica's administration. A pattern began to emerge. Other homeowners had faced similar sudden violations, always accompanied by steep fines or demands to remove structures. Most had quietly complied, unable to fight back. But something about this didn't add up. Mia glanced at her greenhouse, barely visible in the darkness. The moon cast a gentle glow over the careful work she and Tommy had put into it, the love and hope they built into every recycled window pane and repurposed board. In that moment, something shifted inside her, a spark of defiance igniting into determination. She wouldn't tear it down. Not without understanding what was really going on in their picture-perfect neighborhood, and why their HOA president seemed so desperate to control every square inch of their community. Little did Mia know, her decision that night would unravel a web of corruption that ran far deeper than unauthorized structures and petty fines. The truth would shock their entire community, and it all began with a greenhouse that refused to be torn down. The following week brought more than just mounting pressure from the HOA. It brought rain, endless rain that drummed against Mia's bedroom window as she lay awake at night, her mind racing. The fines had started accumulating, adding to the growing stack of bills on her kitchen counter. But something else was keeping her up, the strange pattern she'd begun to notice around Veronica Sterling's property. It started with the trucks. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork, an unmarked white van would pull up to Veronica's house at exactly 2 a.m. At first, Mia thought she was being paranoid. After all, who stays up watching their neighbor's house? But her late-night anxiety had turned into an unexpected surveillance opportunity. "You look terrible," her coworker Jenny commented during their morning shift at the diner. "Are you still fighting with the HOA Nazis?" Mia nearly dropped the coffee pot she was refilling. "Keep your voice down," she whispered, glancing at the regular customers. Half the neighborhood ate breakfast here, and news traveled fast. "But yes. And something's not right, Jenny. Yesterday, I saw 3 different contractors enter Veronica's property. None of them had company logos on their vehicles. So, rich people are always renovating something. In the middle of the night?" Mia leaned closer. "And get this, I checked the city's permit website. There are no active construction permits for her address." Jenny's eyes widened. "Maybe she's building a meth lab," she joked, but her laugh faded when she saw Mia's serious expression. That evening, while helping Tommy with his homework, Mia received an unexpected visitor. Sarah Martinez, her lawyer friend from high school, had driven across town after work. Her expression was grave as she spread documents across Mia's kitchen table. "I did some digging," Sarah said, her voice low even though they were alone. Tommy was upstairs playing video games. "The HOA's financial records are interesting. Did you know they purchased 3 adjacent properties in the last year? All foreclosures, all significantly below market value." Mia frowned. "How is that possible? The dues barely cover our regular maintenance." "Exactly." Sarah pulled out a highlighted document. "And here's something else. Every time they've forced someone to remove a structure or pay massive fines, That property has had some kind of easement adjustment filed within months. English, please? Mia requested, rubbing her temples. They're slowly taking pieces of people's land. Small amounts, a few feet here, a corner there. Most owners probably haven't even noticed. But when you map it all out... Sarah arranged several property surveys on the table, forming a disturbing pattern. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and all the pieces connect to Veronica's property. A chill ran down Mia's spine. But why? What could she possibly? A loud thud from outside made both women jump. Through the window, they could see several shadowy figures moving around Veronica's gazebo, their flashlights creating eerie patterns in the mist. That's new, Mia whispered. Usually it's just the one person. Sarah grabbed her arm. Please tell me you've been documenting all of this. Mia nodded, pulling out her phone. She had dozens of time-stamped photos, notes about unusual activities, and recordings of conversations with other frustrated homeowners. But it wasn't enough. She needed proof of what was happening behind that gazebo. The next day, while cleaning out Tommy's closet, Mia found an unexpected solution: his old drone, a Christmas gift from her parents last year. The battery still worked, and the camera quality was surprisingly good. That night, after tucking Tommy into bed with promises of pancakes for breakfast, Mia stood in her darkened backyard, heart pounding as she guided the drone into the air. The first few passes revealed nothing unusual, just the elaborate gazebo structure that had caused so much neighborhood envy. But as Mia adjusted the camera angle, something caught her eye. The decorative lattice panels around the base weren't purely ornamental. They moved. As she watched, one panel slid aside, and a figure emerged, carrying what looked like surveying equipment. Mia's hands shook as she maneuvered the drone closer, trying to capture clear images without being noticed. The ground around the gazebo wasn't just landscaped, it was engineered. Small vents disguised as decorative rocks dotted the perimeter, and what she had assumed was a water feature appeared to be concealing something much larger. Mom? Tommy's voice nearly made her drop the controller. What are you doing? Just checking the roof for leaks. She lied, quickly landing the drone. With all this rain, I wanted to make sure. Is this about the greenhouse? His young face was serious in the darkness. I heard you crying last night. Mia's heart clenched. She thought she'd been quieter, more careful about hiding her stress. Come here, buddy. She pulled him close, wondering how to explain something she barely understood herself. Sometimes adults make complicated decisions that affect other people. And sometimes those decisions aren't fair. Like when Billy cheated on his math test and didn't get in trouble because his dad's the principal? Something like that. Mia smiled sadly. But you know what? Sometimes the truth has a way of coming out, especially when people get too greedy. As if to punctuate her words, a deep rumbling sound emanated from Veronica's property, followed by the distinct beep of construction vehicles backing up. Tommy's eyes widened. What was that? I don't know, Mia admitted, her mind racing. But I think we're going to find out. Later that night, after double-checking that Tommy was asleep, Mia reviewed the drone footage on her laptop. What she saw made her blood run cold. The gazebo wasn't just hiding an underground room, it was concealing an entrance to something much larger. The surveying equipment, the late-night deliveries, the strategic land grabs, it all pointed to an operation that went far beyond simple HOA corruption. With trembling fingers, Mia created an anonymous email account. The community needed to see this, but she had to be careful. One wrong move could cost her everything: her home, her greenhouse, maybe even custody of Tommy if Veronica's influence reached as far as she suspected. As she prepared to upload the most damning photos, a text message flashed across her phone. It was from an unknown number. Be careful what you dig up. Some things are better left buried. Mia stared at the message, her finger hovering over the post button. She thought about Tommy, about their greenhouse, about all the other families who had been bullied and manipulated. The truth could be dangerous, but secrets could be deadly. With a deep breath, she pressed post. The neighborhood was about to wake up to something far more shocking than unauthorized home improvements. And Veronica Sterling's carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, one leaked photo at a time. The community forum exploded within hours of Mia's anonymous post. What started as whispered speculation over morning coffee turned into a digital wildfire by lunch. The photos showed more than just an unauthorized structure. They revealed a sophisticated underground complex that seemed to sprawl beneath multiple properties in the neighborhood. "Did you see this?" A customer thrust their phone in Mia's face as she refilled their coffee at the diner. The screen showed her drone photos, now shared hundreds of times across various local Facebook groups. "It's like something out of a spy movie." Mia managed a non-committal, even as her heart raced. She'd posted the images at 3 a.m., unable to sleep, driven by a mixture of desperation and determination. Now, watching the neighborhood's reaction unfold, she felt equal parts terrified and vindicated. The photos weren't just blurry shots of construction, they told a story. The first image showed the gazebo's false floor, partially open like a trapdoor. The second captured the network of ventilation systems disguised as landscaping features. But it was the third photo that had everyone talking, a detailed overhead view of what appeared to be a massive excavation project, carefully hidden from street level but clearly visible from above. By mid-afternoon, local news vans had begun circling the neighborhood like vultures. Mia watched from behind the diner's blinds as reporters attempted to get close to Veronica's property, only to be turned away by private security guards who seemed to materialize out of nowhere. "Mom, everyone at school is talking about it." Tommy burst into the diner after school, his backpack still on. "Jake says his dad works for the city, and they're launching an investigation. Is that true?" Mia quickly pulled him into the break room, away from curious ears. "Tommy, listen to me carefully. We need to be very quiet about what we know, okay? Some situations are complicated and... It was our drone, wasn't it?" Tommy's eyes were wide with realization. "That's why you were out that night. You're the one who took the pictures." Before Mia could respond, her phone buzzed with another anonymous text. "You think you're clever with your little toys? Hope you're ready for what comes next." Mia's hands shook as she deleted the message. She'd been careful, using a public Wi-Fi connection, a throwaway email address, even routing her upload through a VPN service she'd frantically researched on YouTube. But somehow they knew. That evening, as Mia drove home with Tommy, their street looked like a circus. News crews interviewed neighbors, while clusters of residents gathered on lawns, gesturing animatedly toward Veronica's property. The gazebo stood silent and innocent-looking in the fading light, its secrets still mostly hidden despite the morning's revelations. "Mrs. Carter!" A reporter spotted her car and rushed over, microphone extended. "Any comment on the allegations of unauthorized underground construction in your neighborhood?" "No comment," Mia managed, hurrying Tommy inside. But through their front window, they watched an even more dramatic scene unfold. Veronica Sterling emerged from her house, immaculate as always in a powder blue suit, her husband Marcus trailing behind her like a well-dressed shadow. She approached the news crews with the confident smile of someone who had never lost control of a situation in her life. "These photos are clearly fabricated." Her voice carried across the street, practiced and smooth. "This is nothing more than a malicious attempt by certain elements in our community who resist proper oversight. The HOA will be launching our own investigation into this slanderous attack." But even as she spoke, something unprecedented happened. A deep rumbling sound emanated from her backyard, and several of her pristine landscaping rocks shifted visibly. The cameras swung toward the movement, capturing what appeared to be a mechanical malfunction in her elaborate water feature. "What was that?" Tommy whispered, pressing his face against their window. "I don't know, honey," Mia replied, but her mind was racing. The underground system was clearly larger and more active than even her photos had revealed. Her phone buzzed again, another anonymous text. "Last chance. Take down the photos, or everything you care about disappears." Mia stared at the message, her fear gradually being replaced by anger. She thought about her greenhouse, about Tommy's pride in their little garden, about all the other families who had been bullied and manipulated. In that moment, she made a decision. She walked to her laptop and, instead of deleting the original post, added more photos. Close-ups of the ventilation systems, shots of the late-night deliveries, documentation of every suspicious activity she'd witnessed. But this time, she included something else, a detailed timeline of the HOA's suspicious property acquisitions, compiled from Sarah's research. "What are you doing?" Tommy asked, watching her type. "Standing up to bullies," Mia replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Sometimes, honey, the scariest thing you can do is tell the truth." Within minutes, her new post was spreading even faster than the first. But this time, it caught the attention of more than just curious neighbors. City officials, who had been dismissive of the initial photos, suddenly found themselves facing questions about permit violations and zoning laws. Local news stations began digging into the property records Sarah had uncovered. Through her window, Mia watched as Veronica's carefully orchestrated press conference devolved into chaos. The rumbling from her yard had grown louder, and now even her private security team looked nervous. Marcus Sterling was on his phone, gesturing frantically, while Veronica's perfect smile had finally cracked. "Mrs. Sterling!" a reporter called out. "Can you explain why your HOA has filed for underground easements on 17 different properties in the past year?" Veronica's face went pale. This wasn't information that had been in Mia's original photos. Other people were coming forward now, adding their pieces to the puzzle. As the sun set on their usually quiet street, Mia held Tommy close and watched their neighborhood transform. Police cars had replaced the news vans, and men in suits who looked distinctly more official than reporters were now examining Veronica's property with great interest. "Mom?" Tommy looked up at her. "Are we in trouble?" Mia kissed the top of his head. "No, honey. I think we're finally getting out of trouble." But even as she said it, she knew this was just the beginning. The photos had cracked open something much bigger than a simple HOA dispute. The truth was emerging, one leaked image at a time, and not even Veronica Sterling's perfectly manicured world could contain it anymore. As night fell, the rumbling from beneath the gazebo grew stronger, like a secret fighting to break free from the earth itself. What had started with a simple greenhouse was about to expose something that would change their community forever. The investigation moved with a speed that surprised everyone, even Mia. Within 48 hours of her second photo leak, the quiet suburban neighborhood had transformed into something resembling a crime scene. Yellow tape surrounded Veronica's property, and teams of investigators in various uniforms crawled over the site like ants at a picnic. But it was the arrival of the FBI that changed everything. "This goes way beyond unauthorized construction," Agent Diana Chin explained to a stunned group of residents gathered at the community center. The federal agent's presence lent gravity to what had seemed, just days ago, like a neighborhood dispute. "What we're dealing with is a sophisticated criminal enterprise operating under the guise of HOA authority." Mia sat in the back of the room, Tommy beside her, as Agent Chin clicked through a presentation that made her drone photos look amateur by comparison. Satellite imagery, thermal scans, and ground-penetrating radar revealed the true scope of what lay beneath their feet. "The underground structure extends approximately 3 acres. Agent Chin continued, pointing to a complex network of tunnels and chambers. "Initial evidence suggests it was being used for document storage, data servers, and what appears to be a sophisticated counterfeiting operation." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Henderson, who had lost her prized rose garden to an HOA violation last summer, actually fainted. "But that's not all." Agent Chen's voice hardened. "The financial investigation has uncovered something even more disturbing. Over the past 3 years, Veronica Sterling and her associates have embezzled approximately $4.2 million from HOA funds." The room erupted in chaos. Mia felt her head spin as she processed the numbers. All those increases in dues, the special assessments for community improvements, the hefty fines, it had all been feeding this massive fraud. "Where did the money go?" someone shouted. Agent Chin clicked to the next slide, showing a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. Mrs. Sterling wasn't just stealing your HOA dues. She was using the money to finance a larger operation. The unauthorized underground structure wasn't just for storage, it was a command center for what we believe to be one of the largest real estate fraud schemes on the East Coast. The evidence was damning. Through a combination of forged documents, manipulated property lines, and strategic foreclosures, Veronica had been slowly assembling a massive underground complex. The garden violations, the structural complaints, the endless fines, they were all part of a calculated plan to force people to sell their properties or surrender portions of their land. But why? Tommy whispered to Mia. Why did she need to build everything underground? His question was answered moments later when Agent Chin revealed the most shocking detail yet. The underground facility wasn't just for counterfeiting money, it was for counterfeiting property deeds, titles, and government documents. Veronica Sterling had been running a sophisticated operation that helped wealthy criminals hide assets and launder money through real estate transactions. The gazebo, Agent Chin explained, was just the tip of the iceberg. Each property she targeted was selected for its potential to connect to this underground network. The greenhouse dispute, Mrs. Carter, she nodded toward Mia, was never about community guidelines. Your property sits over what they plan to make into a major access tunnel. Mia felt the blood drain from her face as security footage appeared on the screen, clearly showing Marcus Sterling and several unidentified men examining blueprints of her property late at night. Her small greenhouse had accidentally blocked a crucial part of their expansion plans. The evidence kept mounting. Financial records showed that Veronica had been working with a network of corrupt property assessors and city officials. The late-night deliveries Mia had witnessed were bringing in specialized drilling equipment and construction materials, all carefully hidden from public view. But surely someone noticed the construction noise. A neighbor protested. Remember those summer concerts Veronica organized? The weekly food truck festivals? The constant landscape work? Agent Chin smiled grimly. All carefully planned to mask the sound of underground construction. She used community events to hide criminal activities in plain sight. As the presentation continued, Mia's phone buzzed with a news alert. Veronica Sterling's picture was everywhere, but not her usual perfectly posed HOA headshot. This was a mugshot, her makeup smeared, her carefully maintained facade finally cracking. The headline read, HOA president arrested in multi-million-dollar underground crime ring. Mom! Tommy tugged at her sleeve. Look at this. He held up his tablet, showing a local news website. The story was already spreading beyond their community. Veronica's scheme had apparently involved properties in 3 different states, with their neighborhoods serving as the central hub. But the biggest shock came when Agent Chin revealed the contents of a hidden safe they'd discovered in the underground complex. Inside were dozens of property deeds, including one for Mia's house, already doctored to show different ownership. Within weeks, Agent Chin explained, they would have forced enough violations to initiate foreclosure proceedings. The property would have been transferred to one of their shell companies, and Mrs. Carter would have lost her home. The room turned to stare at Mia, who felt her legs go weak. She had known something was wrong, but the scope of it, the sheer calculation involved, made her feel sick. What happens now? Someone asked. Mrs. Sterling and her primary conspirators are in custody, Agent Chin replied. We've frozen their assets and secured the underground facility. But we need your help. Anyone who's received violation notices, fines, or pressure to modify their property in the last 3 years needs to come forward. Each incident could help us uncover more victims. As the meeting concluded, neighbors who had once shunned Mia as a troublemaker now surrounded her, offering hugs and tearful apologies. Her drone photos hadn't just exposed the corrupt HOA president, they had uncovered a criminal enterprise that had been slowly consuming their community from below. Outside the community center, the evening news was doing live broadcasts from Veronica's property. The gazebo had been dismantled, revealing the high-tech entrance to her underground lair. As cameras flashed and reporters talked breathlessly about Subterranean Sterling and the Underground HOA Mafia. Mia stood quietly with Tommy, watching their neighborhood's darkness finally come to light. "You really are a hero, Mom," Tommy said, squeezing her hand. Mia looked down at her son, thinking about how close they had come to losing everything. "No, honey," she replied. "I just refuse to back down from a bully. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person willing to stand up and say this isn't right." As they walked home, past the teams of investigators and news crews, Mia's greenhouse stood as a silent testament to resistance. What had started as a simple garden project had exposed a criminal empire, and in doing so, had saved not just their home, but their entire community. The truth had finally emerged from underground, and with it, the dawn of a new era for their neighborhood. The arrest of Veronica Sterling sent shockwaves far beyond their suburban community. As federal agents continued their investigation, the ripple effects touched everything and everyone in ways Mia never could have imagined. On a crisp Monday morning, 3 weeks after the arrest, Mia found herself sitting in the mahogany-lined office of District Attorney James Morrison. The walls were covered with framed newspaper articles about the case, her drone photos now enlarged and displayed like artwork among official evidence photographs. "Mrs. Carter." Morrison leaned forward, his expression serious. "We need you to testify." Mia clutched her coffee cup tighter. "I thought the evidence was already overwhelming. The underground facility, the financial records." "Oh, it is," Morrison nodded. "But your story, a single mother standing up to corruption, using a child's toy drone to expose a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise, that's what will make the jury understand the human cost of their crimes. Plus, you were the first domino. After your photos went viral, we received dozens of tips from other communities where Sterling's organization operated." As if on cue, his assistant brought in a thick stack of files. Each one represented a different neighborhood, a different HOA, all connected to Sterling's network. The pattern was always the same: excessive fines, suspicious property violations, and underground construction disguised as community improvements. "There's something else you should know," Morrison added, pulling out a particular file. "Remember those anonymous threatening texts you received? We traced them. They didn't come from Veronica Sterling." Mia's blood ran cold. "Then who?" "Marcus Sterling," Morrison revealed. "And here's where it gets interesting. He's agreed to testify against his wife in exchange for a reduced sentence. According to him, this whole operation was Veronica's idea. She used his connections in real estate to set it up, but she was the mastermind." The revelation hit Mia hard. She remembered all the times she'd seen Marcus trailing behind Veronica at community events, always quiet, always in her shadow. He seemed so passive. "That was by design," Morrison explained. "While everyone focused on Veronica's obvious power plays, Marcus worked behind the scenes, handling the technical aspects of their operation. The underground construction? That was all him. He's a former mining engineer." As Mia drove home from the DA's office, she noticed changes in the neighborhood. The private security guards were gone, replaced by regular police patrols. The once pristine entrance to their subdivision now bore signs advertising "Under new management" and "Community meeting tonight." The biggest change was in the people themselves. Neighbors who had once hurried past each other now stopped to chat. Children played freely in front yards that had previously been bound by strict HOA regulations. The atmosphere of fear and suspicion had lifted, replaced by a sense of shared survival and rebuilding. At the diner, Mia's typical lunch shift was interrupted by a surprise visit from Agent Chen, who slid into her usual booth with an unusually bright expression. "You'll want to sit down for this," Chen said, patting the seat across from her. "We found something interesting in Veronica's personal files. Remember all those property violations she issued? Turns out she kept meticulous records of her targets. Your greenhouse wasn't just blocking their expansion plans, you were specifically chosen because of your situation." "What do you mean?" Mia asked, sinking into the booth. "Single parent, working multiple jobs, no obvious resources for a legal battle," Chen read from her notes. "They prey on people they think can't fight back. But they made a crucial mistake with you. They underestimated a mother's determination to protect her home. The agent pulled out her tablet, showing Mia a series of surveillance photos of her house, of Tommy's school, of the diner where she worked. They were watching you, building a file. The greenhouse violation was just the beginning. They had plans to systematically destroy your life if you didn't comply. Mia felt sick, but also oddly vindicated. That's why the threats escalated so quickly after I posted the photos. Exactly. But here's the good news, because they targeted you so specifically, the DA is adding harassment and stalking charges to their case. And, Chen smiled, the FBI is considering offering you a reward under our whistleblower program. The word reward echoed in Mia's head as she finished her shift. By evening, when she attended the community meeting at the local elementary school gymnasium, the reality of her situation was still sinking in. The gym was packed. Former victims of Sterling's scheme shared their stories. Elderly residents who had lost their retirement savings to fraudulent fines, young families who had been forced to move under financial pressure, small business owners whose properties had been devalued through manipulated assessments. The total amount of restitution could exceed $10 million, announced the federal prosecutor handling the case. All affected property owners will be compensated. Additionally, any construction damage from the underground network will be repaired at the Sterling estate's expense. But it was the next announcement that brought tears to Mia's eyes. Furthermore, all property violations issued under Sterling's administration are hereby nullified. All fines are cancelled. All structural complaints, including those regarding a certain greenhouse, are dismissed. The applause was thunderous. Tommy, sitting beside Mia, grabbed her hand and squeezed it tight. Later that night, as Mia watered the plants in her now legitimate greenhouse, she noticed a group of neighbors gathering in her driveway. Leading them was Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had lost her rose garden to Veronica's schemes. "We've been talking," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice wavering with emotion. "The neighborhood needs a new HOA board. One that actually serves the community. We'd like you to consider running for president." Mia nearly dropped her watering can. "Me? But I'm not." "You're exactly what we need," another neighbor chimed in. "Someone who stands up for what's right, who thinks about the whole community, not just the rules." As Mia looked at the hopeful faces around her, she realized how much had changed. The same people who had once whispered about her unauthorized structure were now looking to her for leadership. The greenhouse that had almost cost her everything had become a symbol of resistance and renewal. "I'll think about it," she promised, knowing in her heart that she'd probably say yes. Because sometimes the best way to prevent corruption is to step up and show how things should be done. The stars twinkled above her greenhouse, and for the first time in months, Mia felt truly at peace. The nightmare was over, justice was being served, and her community was healing. From the ashes of Veronica Sterling's underground empire, something new and genuine was growing, just like the vegetables in her greenhouse, reaching toward the light. 1 year later, the neighborhood had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The underground bunker that had once housed Veronica Sterling's criminal enterprise had been converted into something extraordinary: the community's first shared hydroponic garden facility, managed by none other than Tommy Carter as part of his school's science program. Standing at the podium during the facility's grand opening, Mia could hardly believe how much had changed. The entrance that once concealed criminal activities now displayed educational posters about sustainable farming. Children pressed their faces against the viewing windows, watching lettuce and tomatoes grow under LED lights in the very spaces where counterfeit documents had once been produced. Who would have thought? Mia began her speech, smiling at the gathered crowd. That our neighborhood's darkest secret would become its brightest future? The audience, filled with familiar faces who had weathered the storm together, laughed warmly. The past year had been a whirlwind of changes. The federal investigation had eventually uncovered Sterling operations in 12 states, leading to over 30 arrests and the recovery of nearly $50 million in stolen assets. Veronica Sterling herself had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, while Marcus had received a reduced sentence of 8 years for his cooperation. But today wasn't about the Sterlings or their crimes. It was about renewal. "Mom!" Tommy called out from his position near the hydroponic displays. "Show them the surprise!" Mia grinned and pressed a button on the remote in her hand. The ceiling panels above the crowd retracted, revealing a massive skylight that flooded the underground space with natural light. The architecture team had worked wonders, transforming the bunker's oppressive atmosphere into something open and welcoming. "This facility," Mia continued, "represents everything our community stands for now. Transparency, collaboration, and growth." She gestured to the various sections of the converted space. "We have classroom areas for educational programs, research stations for local schools, and community growing spaces available to every resident." The funding for this transformation had come from multiple sources. The FBI reward money had provided the initial investment, but it was the community itself that had truly made it possible. Local businesses donated equipment, residents volunteered their time and expertise, and the city had fast-tracked all the necessary permits. After the ceremony, as people explored the facility, Mia found herself back in her original greenhouse. It stood proud and unchanged, a reminder of where everything had started. But now it was just one of many growing spaces in the neighborhood. The HOA restrictions that had once threatened its existence had been replaced by new guidelines that encouraged sustainable home improvements. "Mrs. Carter?" A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Marcus Sterling's daughter, Lisa, who had moved in with her aunt after her parents' arrest. "I wanted to thank you. Not just for exposing everything, but for helping me understand that standing up for what's right is more important than keeping up appearances." Mia hugged the teenager, remembering how lost she had looked during the trials. "How are you doing?" "Really? Better." Lisa managed a small smile. "I'm actually helping Tommy with his vertical farming project. Turns out I inherited Dad's engineering skills, just using them for something good instead." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Agent Chen, now a regular visitor to the community. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said, holding up her phone. On the screen was a news article about similar community transformations happening across the country. Other neighborhoods affected by the Sterling's crimes were following their example, converting recovered underground spaces into community resources. "You started a movement," Agent Chen smiled. "The FBI's getting calls from HOAs nationwide, asking for guidance on community-led oversight and development programs. They're calling it the greenhouse effect, how one small act of resistance can transform an entire community." As the sun began to set, the neighborhood gathered for their monthly community dinner, now a tradition started in the wake of the Sterling scandal. Tables stretched down the street, laden with dishes made from their own grown produce. Children played freely on lawns that had once been subject to strict regulations, and neighbors who had once been strangers now shared stories like family. Tommy rushed up to Mia, clutching his tablet. "Mom, look! My hydroponic design won first place in the state's science fair!" His project, which combined traditional greenhouse techniques with the advanced systems they'd installed underground, had captured the imagination of the judges. "And," he added with a grin, "3 other schools want to copy our program. Can we help them set it up?" Mia looked at her son, amazed by how much he'd grown. The frightened boy who had worried about losing his greenhouse had become a confident young scientist, eager to share his knowledge with others. "Of course we can help," she said, ruffling his hair. "That's what community is all about." Later that evening, as the neighborhood celebration continued under strings of twinkling lights, Mia sat on her porch with a cup of tea. Sarah, her lawyer friend who had helped uncover the initial evidence, joined her. "Ever regret getting involved?" Sarah asked, watching the happy scene before them. Mia thought about the threatening texts, the sleepless nights, the fear of losing everything. Then she looked at her greenhouse, at the transformed bunker beyond it, at her son teaching younger kids about hydroponics, and at her neighbors sharing food and laughter. "Not for a second," she replied. "Sometimes the scariest choice and the right choice are the same thing." A young family walked past, pushing a stroller. They had just moved in, drawn by stories of the neighborhood's unique community spirit and innovative growing programs. The mother waved, and Mia waved back, remembering how isolated she had felt just a year ago. The stars emerged above them, twinkling through the greenhouse glass and reflecting off the new solar panels that now dotted the neighborhood roofs. In the distance, the converted bunker glowed softly, its lights illuminating the future they had built from the ruins of corruption. "You know what the best part is?" Mia said softly, watching Tommy demonstrate his latest experiment to an enthusiastic group of kids. "We didn't just save our homes. We created something better than what was here before." As if to emphasize her point, a cool breeze carried the mingled scents of blooming flowers from dozens of gardens that had sprouted across the neighborhood, gardens that would have once been prohibited. The same underground spaces that had housed secrets and lies now nurtured growth and learning. The community that had been divided by fear was now united by purpose. They had turned darkness into light, secrets into transparency, and corruption into growth. And it all started with a mother who refused to tear down a greenhouse, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can bloom into the most extraordinary changes.